Welcome everyone, this is Bill Lester here, and in this video we're going to cover different fruit crops that homeowners can grow right here in Hernando County. So some good choices for fruits that we can grow right here in Central Florida are blueberries, blackberries, muscadine grapes, figs, loquats, olives, and different stone fruits. This would include peaches, plums, and nectarines. Some different crops that don't do well here in Hernando County would include cherries. There are no varieties of cherries that grow and produce this far south. Apples, there are varieties that are technically low chill varieties and they say do well in Central Florida, but with my experience, they generally don't do very well. You get very, very few apples off them. They're very small apples, so there's a good chance that you'd probably be disappointed growing them. Pears do not grow well in Florida because of a disease called fire blight. Pears, it's pretty much impossible to grow them here. Raspberries do not grow well in Florida. They have to be grown farther north of here, although keep in mind blackberries do well here. And then some of the different tropical fruits like bananas, papayas, avocados. As a general rule, we're too far north for those crops to do really well reliably. Now, if you have a greenhouse or a hoop house or even just a protected site around your house, you can grow bananas and papayas. A number of people do. I even know somebody in Spring Hill that has mangoes. Very nice mango tree. They actually get fruit off of it, but it's a little unusual because if we get a very cold couple of nights during the winter, it's going to cause serious damage to them and knock them back, and they're not going to produce very well or very reliably. One of the most important things you need to understand about temperate fruits or fruits that generally grow from Central Florida up north is something called chilling hours. This is the total number of hours where the temperature is between 32 degrees and 45 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter. So it's not freezing hours, it doesn't have to be down to freezing. Anything between 32 and 45 will do. All these different fruits have a different number of chilling hours that they have to experience during the winter to form buds and form flowers for the next year and flower successfully and get fruit. So there's lots of varieties of apples and even peaches, plums, and nectarines that do very well far up north that require a huge number of chilling hours. If you brought one of those trees down here to Florida, it may grow, it may look good, but it's probably never going to bloom and get fruit in the spring. So a very important thing to remember about temperate fruits is the number of chilling hours. Now, of course, tropical fruits that grow well generally south of Central Florida don't require chilling hours because they don't like chilling at all. That's partly because those plants never go dormant. They're designed to grow year-round in the tropics. So chilling hours that we experience up here are going to actually damage those crops. Some of the things you need to consider before putting in a fruit tree or a small fruit crop is having the proper soil pH. All these different plants grow at different ideal pHs. Drainage, they all require good drainage. And in fact, for most of these different crops and many trees in general, if you have them growing in a spot where it floods frequently and they sit in standing water for more than 1 or 2 days, they'll actually die. It'll cause a root rot and they'll die pretty quickly. You have to have the correct number of hours of sunlight or shade, and then you have to have some ability to irrigate because all these different crops, when you first plant them, have to be watered on a very regular basis. But many of them, especially the trees, once they become well established, you don't have to water them at all, or very rarely, if you don't get any rain, you might have to water them. One fruit crop that does very well here in Central Florida is muscadine grapes. That's because it's native to the southeastern United States. So when you're growing these vines, you want to allow between 12 and 20 feet between the plants because they'll grow very large. They need to be trained on wires that are put between the posts. You have to set up an actual post and wire system. University of Florida has a lot of very good EDIS documents with diagrams that show you exactly how to set up your plants and then how to prune them in the winter. You would want to prune them in the late winter before they start to leaf out and grow the next spring. They prefer a soil with a pH of 5.5 to 6.5, slightly acidic. They have very few insects and pests as a general rule because they are native. They're very well adapted to this area. and they could be used for either fresh eating. Keep in mind they do have skins and they do have seeds, something that people aren't really used to anymore when eating grapes, or you can make wine out of them. There's a number of different varieties of muscadine grapes. Here you see a few of them, and they're going to range anywhere from black skin to red skin to greenish white. Some varieties are better for making wine than others. Once again, there's a lot of good EDIS documents on all the different varieties and what they're specifically best for, whether it's fresh eating or making wine with. The more traditional European wine grapes cannot be grown successfully here in Florida, and that's because of something we have here called Pierce disease. This is a bacterial disease, Xylella fastidiosa. It's vectored by a very small insect called the glassy-winged sharpshooter. That's a small tree hopper-like insect that has a piercing sucking mouth part that vectors the bacteria from vine to vine. If you try growing these grapes here in Florida, they're going to very quickly get this bacterial disease. And what it does is it causes the edges of the leaves to look scorched. And even though the weather here is ideal for growing European wine grapes, that's the reason why we don't have those growing here, and a wine industry based on more traditional European wine grapes. Blueberries are grown commercially in the area, so obviously they do very well here, but there's some things that you need to keep in mind if you're going to try growing blueberries. Blueberries require chilling hours of 250 and up. Here in Hernando County, we get as a general rule between 300 and 350 chilling hours a year during the winter, and that varies quite a bit from one year to the next. But blueberries are considered a very low chill crop because they require a lower number of 250 or so chill hours. They're pollinated by bumblebees, not honeybees, but they have to be pollinated by bumblebees. They require a well-drained soil and a very acidic pH, anywhere from 4.0 to 5.5. They require a lot of organic matter, at least 3 or 4%. Keep in mind, naturally here in Florida, we have 1% or less. So normally they're grown in either containers or in pine bark. Commercial growers don't plant their blueberry bushes actually in the ground. They'll make mounds of finely ground pine bark and pine bark compost and actually grow the bushes in that. And drip irrigation is definitely best for blueberries. Very important way to avoid a lot of diseases is by using drip irrigation. Commercial growers generally grow a variety of blueberries called Southern High Bush. It's very popular with commercial growers because there's been a lot of very successful University of Florida breeding programs. They've been able to develop cultivars and varieties that take fewer and fewer chill hours so they can be grown further and further south in Florida. The problem is they're very difficult for homeowners to grow because they require very few chill hours. They tend to bloom and start to set fruit very early in the season. So if you get a late frost or freeze, it might ruin the entire crop. So because of that, they're a little tough for homeowners to grow, and we generally don't recommend them for homeowners. What we do recommend for homeowners is to grow a rabbit eye variety blueberry. These are slightly older varieties. They grow well from about Ocala north, although they'll do very well right here in Hernando County. The plants tend to be more vigorous and more forgiving of less than perfect care. You can see here the names of a number of different varieties, and they tend to flower a tiny bit later in the spring, so a lot of times they'll avoid that late frost or freeze and not lose all the flowers or lose all the little berries for that year. Blueberries have their own set of pests and diseases. Weeds are especially stressful for blueberry bushes because they're small, they're growing in pine bark, they don't have a very large root system, so it's very important to keep them weed free. Phytophthora is a type of soil-borne fungus that if you're growing blueberries and they sit in standing water for more than a day or so, a lot of times they'll develop a root rot caused by Phytophthora and kill the bush. Botrytis flower blight is another fungal disease. This attacks the flower and the very tiny fruit and tends to turn it fuzzy. If you're familiar with strawberries you might leave in the refrigerator for too long, they'll get fuzzy and start to look like a cotton ball. That's from botrytis. That's a very common fruit disease. Flower thrips are especially damaging to blueberries. especially early in the season when they're flowering. It'll cause a lot of flower and small fruit drop. Fruit flies are a major problem for blueberries. That's a major problem for commercial growers of blueberries. The fruit flies will lay their eggs on the small developing blueberries, and the immature fly develops inside of the blueberry. So when you pick it and eat it, it has all those little worms in it. And spotted winged Drosophila, which you see pictured on the right here, is an especially bad species of fruit fly that causes a lot of problems for commercial growers. Blackberries do very well in this area, and as a matter of fact, we have a growing number of commercial blackberry operations and even some U-pick blackberry operations right here in the county. There's a number of different varieties of blackberries that all grow well in this area. They can range from thornless or some of the newer thornless varieties all the way to upright thorny varieties and the old-fashioned thorny varieties that have to be trellised up. You might notice that all the names, or almost all the names of these different varieties, are named after Indian tribes. It's because they were all developed by the University of Arkansas. It's all their varieties they've developed. Now, the climate in Arkansas is similar to Florida. It gets very hot in the summer, tends to have kind of a long summer, but Arkansas isn't exactly central Florida. They have a much longer, much colder winter, and we have a much longer, much hotter, steamier summer. So growers are still experimenting with all these different varieties to get an idea of which ones grow best here and which ones produce the best. As a general rule, the different thorny varieties do the best and are the most productive here in Central Florida. For culture, they need to grow in a very well-drained site. They prefer a pH of 5.6 to 6.5. If you're thinking about growing blackberries, you would order or purchase bare root plants and put them in 3 to 5 feet apart in the late winter, anywhere between December and February, and then fertilize in the late spring. Blackberries have their own set of pests and diseases. Stink bugs can be a problem with blackberries. What happens is the blackberries bloom, and then the very small fruit early in the season, stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs will poke holes in the fruit and feed on it. That causes disease organisms to be able to get into the fruit, and then either the fruit falls off early or is damaged by the time it matures. The plants do get a number of different fungal leaf spots, so you're probably going to have to use some type of fungicide during the season. Blackberries get an unusual problem. There's a couple species of algae that are actually parasites on plants. So parasitic algae, or it's also called orange felt disease, is a problem with blackberries here in the county. It tends to be worse in really wet areas or after very, very wet years. The parasitic algae will get either on the stem, like you see in the picture here, or on the leaves, and it looks a little bit like orange felt. And it also gets several other fungal diseases, anthracnose, Botrysphaera is a type of stem rot, and botrytis, like I mentioned earlier, is a very common fruit type of fungal disease that causes the fruit to turn furry and not be marketable or not be edible. When you're growing blackberries, of course, drip irrigation is best. That way you can keep the leaves dry, help reduce the incidence of fungal leaf spot problems. You need to keep in mind the thorny varieties can be very sharp, and if you get a large group of plants growing, it can be very, very difficult to get in there and harvest them when they're ripe and ready. They grow best on a sturdy wire and a 4x4 trellis. Once again, University of Florida has EDIS documents that have diagrams that if you're interested in growing blackberries, has diagrams and directions of exactly how to do it correctly. And like I mentioned, it's a new up-and-coming commercial crop here in Hernando County. There's still a lot of University of Florida research going into the best varieties, the best methods for growing them, how to best deal with orange felt fungus problems, and the growers are doing a lot of research on their own also to figure out what's the best way to grow them, what's the best varieties to use. The University of Florida has done a lot of breeding work for many years on low chill stone fruits. Keep in mind here in Central Florida, right here in Hernando County, we get between 300 and 350 chill hours per winter, and that varies quite a bit. It could be a lot more, it could be a lot less during a warm winter. but University of Florida has worked on developing different varieties that are going to grow well here in Central Florida or even further south than here. The advantage is that the fruit is available earlier. Our peach, plum, and nectarine season is much earlier than the rest of the country. One disadvantage is if they get their chill hours and they start to bloom a little bit too early and we get a very late cold snap or freeze, you could lose all the flowers and all the fruit, and that year you have absolutely no fruit to show for your fruit trees. University of Florida has a lot of very good EDIS documents on all the different varieties and the number of chill hours they require, so you could look through that and figure out what are going to be the best varieties for right here. You want to grow something that requires between 300 and 350 chill hours per year. The varieties and types of peaches and other fruit trees that grow in Georgia, North and South Carolina, and up the East Coast are not appropriate for this area. Some of them require up to like 1,000 chill hours per winter, and we'll never get that many chill hours down here. So even if the tree grows and looks good, might be a nice looking ornamental tree, it's probably never going to flower and fruit in the spring. So if you're looking through catalogs, it's very, very important that you find a fruit tree that's appropriate for this area and appropriate for the number of chill hours that we get here. Low chill plums from the University of Florida can produce very, very well here in Central Florida. You see all these different varieties here, the number of chill hours they require are all well within what we're generally in an average winter going to get here in Hernando County. There are a number of different low chill peach varieties that are going to do very well here. Although you notice a few of the varieties like Gulf Prince and Florida King that require 400 and 450 chill hours probably would not be the best choice for here. You want to stick with something that requires 300 to 350 or maybe even a little bit less chill hours to do well here. Here are a couple of varieties that would be a little bit more appropriate for this area. And you can see they develop varieties that need very, very little chilling during the winter. Some of them, Florida Prince and Florida Grow, as low as 150 chill hours per year. So they could be grown successfully even further south than Hernando County. There's several different varieties of nectarines that'll do well in this area, although you'll notice that not all of them would be the most appropriate choice for here. Some of them are going to do a little bit better further North Florida, like Sun Mist and Suncoast, but there's varieties that do well here. Loquats are another very commonly grown landscape ornamental tree here in Central Florida, and they actually flower and produce fruit. They're a little bit different. They flower in the fall, and the fruit is going to mature in the late winter. And even if you don't like the fruit, it makes a very attractive front yard tree. It's a mid-sized understory tree, generally very fast growing, very healthy. Does have a few problems, but not too many. Here you see a picture on the left of the ripe fruit that a lot of people enjoy. Not everybody likes them, but you can pick them. I've heard that you can make them into jellies and jams or just eat them fresh. And they get a lot of flowers. They're very fragrant when they flower. Like I said, they flower in the fall. Picture on the right-hand side here. Loquats are also known as Japanese plums. It is an evergreen tree, so it's not going to drop all of its leaves during the winter. Like I mentioned, it blooms from the late fall into the early winter. Now, one problem is if we get very, very cold weather here, it can actually knock the fruit off, cause the fruit to freeze, and then that year you may get no fruit off of it. You can try growing these trees from seed. It's going to take about 6 to 8 years for that seed to grow into a tree and mature and start to bear fruit. It's very important to control weeds and the sod around the tree if you decide to put it in your front yard, and irrigate 1 or 2 times a week when the tree is young and freshly planted. Figs can grow fairly well in this area, but they have a couple problems. They have a couple diseases and issues that make them a little bit difficult to grow. But if you understand those problems, you can successfully grow your own figs here. Figs are native to the Mediterranean, but there are some varieties that grow fairly well here in Florida. Keep in mind, our weather is not like Mediterranean weather because we have very long, very wet, very hot summers. So that makes it a little difficult on some of the different Mediterranean crops to grow here. But some of the varieties that can do well here is Celeste, Brown Turkey, Green Ischia, San Piero, and Magnolia. Figs, of course, require very well drained soil, or because they stay relatively small, it becomes a small tree at best, can be grown in a very large container, which is generally the easiest way to grow figs. Figs are one of those crops that have a huge problem with root knot nematodes. So if you buy a fig tree and plant it in your yard and you have sandy soil and root knot nematodes, the fig tree will not die immediately, but it really won't grow and thrive. Over a couple years, it's just not going to grow. It's not going to produce. Bit by bit, it looks more and more unhealthy, and then will probably eventually die from the root knot nematodes. Another problem that figs have is by late summer, they always have something called fig rust, which causes spots on leaves and causes premature leaf drop. The leaves are going to drop too early in the fall. So you're going to want to treat that with some kind of copper fungicide or other appropriate fungicide. Figs can have problems sometimes with mealybugs, a few other insect pests, but not too many. And they can take cold weather, but not extremely cold weather. So if we start getting very serious freezes, your fig tree can either be damaged by a freeze or flat out killed by disease. So because of the root knot nematodes, it really does work best to try to grow figs in a very large container, a half a whiskey barrel type container, or a large pot. That way you can avoid the nematode problems. And if you know that late every summer you're going to have fig rust, you can have the fungicide ready and start treating it early to try to avoid the rust. And that way you're going to have a healthy fig and you'll actually get fruit off of it. Olives are something that you don't normally associate with Florida, but they are a new commercial crop here. There's literally hundreds of different varieties of olives that are mostly native to the Middle East and Mediterranean area. And some of them do well here in Florida, even with our long, hot, steamy summers, but many other varieties just are not going to do well here in Florida. So this is something that a lot of people are experimenting with and working on, and they've actually found a number of varieties that are going to do well and produce well here in Florida. So olives are actually grown commercially here in Florida now. They have a very complicated cross-pollination issue. You have to plant plants of different varieties for the correct cross-pollination, and they have to be the exact correct varieties because they need to flower at the same time for cross-pollination. University of Florida has done some research on this and has lists of different recommended varieties if you're thinking about putting an olive tree in your yard. And there are some varieties that do very well here in Central Florida. Other varieties we know don't do well here. And other varieties they're not even really sure yet. They're still doing a lot of work and a lot of research in that area. I believe that's all we have for fruit crops here in Hernando County. The picture you see here on the slide is a fruit fly, which can be a problem with any kind of fruit you're growing. Everything that gets a fruit on it, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's peaches, plums, and nectarines, has problems with fruit flies that you're going to have to be aware of and be able to deal with. So if you have any questions, please get in contact. Feel free to ask, and thank you very much.